It's now been over a year since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has claimed millions of lives and changed the way in which each of us relates to and navigates the world. 2020 was the year the Earth stood still, and COVID-19 brought entire countries to a standstill, with huge sections of the global population kept indoors in an effort to curb the pandemic.
But while we've all stayed inside, it begs the question, what's happened to the environment outside? I'm Din Sajada. Is this coronavirus relief or time for redemption? We've all seen the claims that nature is healing, like this one, and all of these. But how true are these claims? And do these overwhelmingly positive stories paint a true picture of how the environment has been affected during the pandemic?
Dubbed the Anthropause, the respite of lockdown has given us a special glimpse at a world that was once quieter, clearer, and more obviously full of nature. In the UK, we've been able to track down the immediate impacts of the lockdowns. Public transport journeys dropped by a staggering 82% in the first month of lockdown. Additionally, wildlife appears to be thriving again, with an increase of sightings across a variety of animals, namely birds.
However, as look at one of those articles we showed you earlier, dolphins are turning to Venice.
Whilst most cities' waterways cleared up due to less traffic and pollutants entering them, this is a false story that was widely spread across the internet, with Twitter being the main culprit in spreading this misinformation. The footage was to have been discovered and filmed in Sardinia, not Venice canals. The spreading of misinformation like this can be dangerous and can also cause skepticism for any other sorts of reporting on environmental impacts. To find out more and get the facts straight, I spoke to Chief Ecologist at Habitat First, Dr Phoebe Carter, about how the pandemic has affected biodiversity.
To what extent has the pandemic boosted biodiversity and how has it benefited the environment?
That's a really difficult one. I think if we look at first lockdown, I think there were definite boosts to biodiversity. I think a lot of public open spaces, the green spaces, weren't managed as much as they normally are by sort of councils. Normally councils mow them continually, and I think that stopped a bit. So that allowed sort of wildflowers and grasses to grow a bit longer and develop, and that sort of would have helped our pollinators and other invertebrates, and then of course everything that sort of depends on those as well. It's likely that sort of less traffic in that first lockdown would have maybe reduced sort of some of the hedgehog deaths that normally sort of occur sort of with roadkill. It's also thought that because there was less traffic going on, there was less air pollution, and air pollutants are known to sort of break down the scents that flowers release, which makes it harder for bees to find those flowers. So it's thought that bees might have had a bit of a boost as well by being able to find flowers more easily because there was less sort of air pollution. But we have to be very careful, I think, in saying that there was a big definite boost to biodiversity, because a lot of it might have been our behaviour changes, how we spent more time in our gardens and we noticed more nature and we spent more time in the parks. Some of it might be that we noticed more rather than there being a big increase. And of course, I think with the second lockdown, things didn't stop as much as they did in the first one. So I think for biodiversity, there would have been less benefit from this last lockdown.
Okay, so if biodiversity and nature aren't doing as well as we presumed, what environmental systems have actually benefited from the pandemic?
At ground zero of the outbreak, China was one of the first countries to report a silver lining to the pandemic. This video showing the reduction in nitrogen dioxide over China went viral shortly after it was released. Decreased emissions has arguably been one of the most talked about positives to stem from the pandemic, with it being reported that there has been a 7% reduction in global carbon emissions, with researchers from the GCP saying global carbon emissions dropped by an estimated 2.4 billion metric tonnes in 2020. To provide us with more information and a clearer understanding of the 7% reduction in carbon emissions, I spoke with Dr Oksana Tarasova, Chief of the Global Atmosphere Watch Programme at the World Meteorological Organisation.
How has a 7% reduction in emissions due to the pandemic impacted climate change?
First of all, we need to be very clear that the estimates of 7% it is actually changing. So there are different estimates. 7% is the average estimate of the emission reduction, and we are not talking about all greenhouse gases. It's very important to understand that when we talk about impact of greenhouse gases on climate, we need to look at the whole package of the gases. So that includes CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, are CFCs, which are ozone depleting substances as well, SF6. So there's a whole package. When we are talking about 7%, we are talking only about CO2. What happens is that when you look at this emission reduction, the response of the climate system on the small changes, and these are small changes like that, would be expected within about 2 years. You will see the response in temperature. We need also to be very clear that it is not emissions which drive climate. It's the concentrations, and there's a big difference between emissions of greenhouse gases and concentrations of greenhouse gases. And for you to make it very easy to understand what's the difference between emissions and concentration, let's imagine you have your bank account, and every month you have your incomes and every month you have your expenditures. So concentration is the state of your bank account, and emissions is your incomes. And you can imagine that it is not linearly connected. So there's sometimes you have much more uptake or expenses, sometimes you have much less. The same happens with nature. What is important is that we are also proud of ourselves talking about 7%. But the point is that it looked like the life stands still. We were not doing anything. Can you realize that when we are doing nothing, as we think, we do nothing, we still emit 93%.
Yeah, it's insane. Even with being in lockdown as well.
When you close your doors and you stand in the house, you still emit, just by the fact of our existence, 93% of CO2. Where does it come from? Energy consumption, production of the goods, transport of the goods. We didn't stop consuming.
So the pandemic has not been as fruitful to the environment as we may have thought. But now, how can we use this global disaster to help with the imminent environmental crisis?
Yeah, I mean, we can't deny the fact we are in an ecological emergency. There's a lot of talk about the climate emergency, but actually underpinning that is the ecological emergency. You know, how we have literally taken away so many of the natural habitats that species rely on, but also we rely on for all of those sort of climate regulatory purposes. So the ecological emergency is the biggest issue, and we've all got a responsibility, really. And there are things we can do. Everyone can do something. It doesn't matter where you live. If you've got a little window box, or if you've got a balcony, or if you've got a garden, then we can all do something. We can plant native wildflower seeds in a pot, and you'll be amazed at how many sort of butterflies and bees you'll see sort of on your windowsill. It might not seem a lot doing that, but if everybody did that, then that's a big sort of collective step. One of the biggest things I'm trying to convince everyone to do is to mow their gardens less. I mean, save time, save money. Same for the councils. They can save a lot of money by not mowing. And that creates a much, much better habitat and a mosaic of habitats that all these invertebrates need.
While the pandemic has in fact provided a unique opportunity to better understand how human activity and its absence affects the environment, there has overall not been any significant benefits that contribute to healing the environment we all share. It's now up to us as a collective to open our eyes and realise that if we don't act and fight now for our planet, then we could in fact lose it.